Have you ever thought about building a wallet, but the thought of all the interior pockets just makes you shy away from it, push that project off till later? Today, I want to walk you through building my favorite wallet. This is a spring clip wallet, and it is literally my favorite wallet. It's what I pack in my pocket every day. I love this wallet because it's thin, so it's comfortable to carry in my pocket. It's simple to build. You're gonna see that as we move through this video. But the way we've designed this is different than a lot of people build these. We're gonna do one extra step in here that makes this wallet to where I can get cards out of this anywhere without opening my wallet all the way. Sometimes people build these where you have to open it all the way to get your cards out and have your cash out there. I don't like doing that. I like to make it easy to get those out of here. But I wanna show you what I'm going to be building this out of and get started on this. We actually start the construction a little bit prior to doing the tooling on this project with the materials that we're building it out of. So let's take a look here. So first, to give you a close-up on what this wallet looks like here, we have the inside, I have card pockets on either side as well as this spring clip in the middle. That's what makes it a spring clip wallet. That holds your cash. Now, it looks like you can't fit very many cards in here, but these do break in really nice. Like I said, this is what I carry all the time. I got 6 cards on either side with room for more. So they stretch, hold in there good, and then they got the little clip in there. Like I said, that holds your cash. So really cool little wallet. But I'm going to be building out of a spring clip wallet material pack that we just started offering. So what comes in this pack? I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to also show you how it all goes together. But inside the pack, we got little step-by-step instructions. Gives you kind of an idea what you have going there, as well as some diagrams on the back to reference with those instructions there. And there's also a couple tooling patterns that come in with the material pack. If you want to just get a tooling pattern that we're using today, you can get this in the Leather Life community. We'll link that up down below. You can just jump on, download that pattern. But if you want to get this whole material pack, get both tooling patterns, as well as we have 2 body pieces that are clicked out ready to go. We have 2 pocket pieces, as well as the hardware required in here for that spring clip. So this all comes in that material pack. We'll link that up down below. So if you want to get that, you can as well. Otherwise, like I said, if you just want to grab the tooling pattern, jump in the community, and be a part of that, you can get that, that pattern there and follow along with us. You just have to cut all your own parts out instead of using the clicked out pieces like we're using here today. So let's go to step number 1. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take these 2 body pieces, and I actually get those glued together. Like I said, we're going to start the construction before we start tooling here. So I have our pattern that I printed off and taped over that with the clear packing tape. It's going to make that reusable. We'll use it as we go to tooling. But we have the marks in here. These are these stitch marks that are already on here. These 2 center ones is what I'm looking for. So that's going to give me an idea about the center 1/2 inch, because I don't want to not glue together that 1/2 inch in the center. So I'm just going to kind of put a little mark here. I can slide that pattern up a little bit just to give us that guideline. I'll even use my pattern as a straight edge just to mark that, because we need to make a little pocket so that our spring clip has somewhere to go to. And you can see this, I'm using my marks that I just did as a pattern. Makes that pretty darn easy. And we'll use that as a straight edge because it happens to be sitting right here. Makes that simple there. Okay, the glue that I'm going to be using is a contact cement. So this is barge contact cement in my little canister here. And again, we're not gluing that center 1/2 inch that we just marked out. So I'm putting my glue up to that line and then all the way out to the edges. I'm going to do that on both halves of both pieces here. With the contact cement, we're just going real light. I don't want a thick coat. I just want it nice and even and thin all the way out there. Be sure and clean off any glue you get on your table. These poor tables have seen a lot of glue over time, but that's all right. So with that, I'm waiting. Want that to get just a little bit tacky before we put those together. That's the idea of contact cement. If I put them together wet, they would still move. I can move those around, but they won't hold as solid and dry as quick as if we let those tack up. But we're not gonna go quite all the way dry with them. We're gonna kind of split the difference here. The reason being, as I said, if they're still just a little wet, you can shift some as you go. So if you're gluing something that you're not super confident in getting right where you want, you can put it down a little bit wet and shift it. It's just going to take a lot longer for that to dry. But I'm fairly confident, so I've let this get pretty dry, but I'm also going to leave them just a little wet. That way I can adjust some as we go here. Just matching those edges up. Before pushing it down all the way. The leather that we're using in here in this kit, this is 3/4 ounce, so it's really thin leather, but instead of taping the back of that piece and tooling it and then peeling the tape and then gluing it all together, to me it's easier just to glue this thing together like this so it's set, ready to go. It's kind of pre-lined. We have that thicker piece of leather now. We still have to be careful that we don't cut through that piece, but it's gonna feel really good when we go to tool on that. And we just gotta make sure that we didn't glue that center 1/2 inch there. So we'll take this over to the bench and get ready to tool. So like I said, we're not doing any taping because we've essentially held the back with the liner itself there. So that's gonna keep things from stretching on us as we tool this. But we're gonna dampen this down. Remember, the part we're tooling is actually only that 3/4 ounce, so it's not gonna take a ton of moisture to get this cased up. I don't wanna put too much and soak that all the way through. But using my pattern here, I'm gonna put this in place. I'm gonna mark this border line on the inside because I can't really get to that with my dividers at all. But then these other lines, I'm just gonna be marking the floral lines themselves, the actual tooling lines, and then my border, I'm gonna put in with my wing dividers, but you can use a straight edge for that as well. I just want those to be really nice and crisp on the edges. So we got a good crisp 1/4 inch border around there. Let's see. I know I haven't got all my lines yet. But I can just hold this down, double check. Okay. Looks like we just got a couple lines up in here to get. Now that's looking pretty good, like we got them all. So we move that down. I'm just gonna reach up, grab my dividers here. Now again, you can use a straight edge. You can even transfer off the pattern if you want to, but I like to make sure that we're really nice and crisp with those lines around there. You can take a pretty bad piece of art and put it in a nice frame and it can make things look really good. You can also take a really nice piece of tooling, get your border jacked up, and it takes away from it quite a bit. Now, we're going to be using the Deluxe Beginner's Tooling Kit to tool this up. So my swivel knife that comes with that, I'm going to strop it up with a little bit of rouge here, or just a buffing compound on a scrap of leather. That just helps polish that blade so it runs smooth. I'm going to start by cutting my borders first. Now remember, when we're tooling on that thinner leather, because we're really just tooling the 3-4 ounce leather, it feels thicker right now because we have a second layer of that 3-4 glued in there. But if I cut through that first layer, we're going to have something that can pick up, peel up over time. Especially a wallet like this, in and out of pockets, I don't want that. So we want to make sure everything is solid. So in doing that, I'm not cutting super deep with my cuts. I'm just getting a nice guideline that we're going to be able to follow around with our bevels. This big line that curves around, notice I started that up in the middle. Now I can come around this way. Pull that line around. The other way, if you're getting in too tight, you can always just turn that leather to get around those bigger curves as well. Main thing is that you keep in a position where you're comfortable. That way you can get nice smooth cuts. So whether you're moving your knife, your leather, yourself, your whole body around there, make sure we're getting good smooth cuts. Because when you're running your swivel knife, that's laying the foundation for your entire pattern, right? That's going to tell us right where we're beveling, because we're beveling right on these lines. So if we have cuts that are jacked up and where we don't want them, it's really hard to clean that up with your bevel work. On the other hand, if you have really nice smooth cuts, you're going to make your bevel work a whole lot easier, because you're not trying to fight jagged cuts. Now, if you have trouble seeing your lines, which side of the line to bevel on, I recommend that you mark your background spots, which are patterns that are shaded in the background, so you can either look back and reference those, or when you're transferring your pattern, push those dots down there. But we'll just run through and mark them, so hopefully it makes it a little easier for you to see as we're going along here, see what it is that we're working on. But with those in place, now we're ready to do some beveling. So I'm going to start by grabbing the large bevel out of my kit here. And I like to start on my borders. This, again, just gets a nice solid frame around things. As we're beveling, I'm just barely moving that bevel every time I hit it. Hitting that tool down. Every time I strike it, it's moving along, but it's just barely moving. We're not jumping all the way, because I want to get nice smooth lines the first time I bevel. Now, if you get something that's a little choppy, yeah, we can come back over and clean stuff up as you go. But the better we can get at beveling that smooth the first time you bevel it, it's going to speed you up a lot, because then you're only beveling one time instead of 3, 4, 5 times as you're trying to clean that up. Now when it comes to beveling in all the other lines, which side of the line do we bevel on? The easiest way to figure that out comes back to those backgrounds, and that's why I had you mark those, because every background, that's going to be the furthest thing back, right? So we're going to bevel towards that. It means I'm putting the flat side of the bevel towards me on this line, because that line's touching a background, and we put that shading down into the background. This line over here, that's touching that background spot. So put the flat side of the bevel towards me, push that shadowing down into that background. But once I started on that line in that direction, meaning on that side of the line, I'm going to continue all the way till that line ends. So that's what's telling me which side of this line to bevel on, is finding where it touches a background and then continuing on that line the rest of the way. You see, I really just fade that off. So I just strike that tool lighter and lighter as it comes down here and just disappears. Here, this one's touching a background. I can do the same thing there. Fade that off as it fades away. Now, if you mash into something, just touch that up, ready to go. So we're going to continue around, bevel all these lines, beveling towards our background, and right up in here on the inside of this curve is the only other spot I want to talk about, is if this gets a little bit tight for this bevel, which it's a pretty big curve, it's pretty decent size, I think we're going to be able to get it all the way. But if that was getting a little bit tight and it was getting choppy, yeah, that actually works really good. But your other option is to jump down to that smaller size bevel. It's a little bit narrower, and that can really get around inside curves really well. It's also going to be handy on these couple little shorter lines. Just gives you a little bit more room as you're working in those tighter spaces. All right, let's get this beveled up, and then we'll come back and do some shading. For shading, I'm going to be using the vertical line thumbprint. You can also use a pear shader in the same spot, looking for the same things here. But we're going to start by shading these areas where something is turned over. So this swirl comes and rolls back on itself or under itself. So I'm going to get that shading just right down in here. Nothing fancy, just getting it right up next to that line. Mashing that down a little bit. You can see we start getting some of that burnish. Burnish is that darker color underneath there, shows that shadowing that's rolled underneath itself. Okay. Now, shifting over here, this kind of leaf thing here, it rolls back as well. So I'm going to turn, we're going to come right underneath where that line is, and we're going to shade in there as well, getting that dark burnish, that darker color, right in under that line, and then let that shading fade down as we come down that vine there. Now we're going to be looking at, there's some sticker vines in here. So those are all made up of a shorter curved line and a longer line down there. And that's where I want my shading is focused by that shorter curved line. And then that shading fades out of the vine and down the vine there. So we've created this little highlighted ridge right in there next to that short line. And another one right here, we'll do the same thing. So as I'm getting that deeper dark spot there out at the end, I have that tool tipped quite a bit here. We're getting just that edge, making sure I'm not getting the rest of that tool impression down here. I'm just watching right there at the corner. Now to fade that down a little bit and soften that back edge, I just straighten that tool up a little bit. Fade that down there. Now, this little guy's tucked in there. We just got a sliver underneath there, so just put a little bit of shading in there to give that some shadow to it underneath there. This little pod here's got two little curved lines that go out. So I'm just going to put some shading down each of those curved lines. Little rounded lines where they're convex instead of concave, just meaning it's rounded out instead of swooping in. And by putting that shading on each side there and fading it in, we've kind of just created a little bit of ridge and depth in that pod there by placing that shading out on those edges. Kind of cool. All right, we got a couple more places to shade here. I'm gonna treat this as kind of two separate little sticker vines. That little rounded edge that will get that shading in next to, get that highlighted ridge. And now we're gonna come back on this little sticker and get some shading in on that too. Now you can work that shading back and forth to smooth out any ridges or any problems that you find in there. See, I'm just coming back, lightly tapping that. We had kind of a rounded curve here. I put some shading on. I'm going to show you another trick for smoothing those out if you're having troubles with it too. Here in just a second, but I want to finish putting this shading in. Now, this big stump here, this can be easy to put too much shading in, so we don't want to do that. We're going to put a little shading out here where it's rounded on that edge, and then I'm bringing a little bit out along this big rounded edge here. Bring a little shading just right on the border line here where it tucks under the border. Smooths that out a little bit. And real light down that edge here. Okay, now I told you I'd show you how to smooth some stuff up in here. So this is another trick. If you have your stylus, it has that little modeling spoon on that end. Again, this is just the tool out of the kit here. But if we're any choppy lines, I can really just bring that in, work those over and smooth that up with that modeling spoon side as well. Got a little chop in here, we can just run over that, make short work of those choppy lines, help smooth those up a little bit. So don't be afraid to use that tool in there as well. Just help clean things up a little bit if need be. I know it feels like cheating when you're doing it because it's so easy, but it's not cheating. There's no rules against it, you can do it. Now, shading put away. Notice I didn't put any shading on this outside of that big swirl in there. That was on purpose. We're gonna come back with the next tool. This is called your veiner. It's kind of a little bit of a crescent shape to that there, has some ridges in there. This, I'm gonna be coming along the outside of that curve there, that big swirl. We're gonna start down in here, because this swirl comes all the way back from here. So I'm gonna start real light. I have the curve going with the curve of the swirl, curve of the tool going with that as well. And I'm watching where the impression is pointing to. As we're going around here, I want my impression pointing towards the center area. You see, I start really, really light. We're just barely touching that. As it comes up here, I'll start hitting just a touch harder. And being consistent with my spacing, they're almost just getting a little farther apart each time. We kind of tuck under this border here, so we have to pretend that goes all the way around. Now we'll just barely pick up a little bit of those impressions so we can get it look like it's just coming out from underneath there. Those kind of disappear as they went all the way underneath that. Okay, this is continuing to rotate around here. I'm rotating this tool so the impressions are pointing back towards that center of that swirl. Getting just a little bit harder so they're coming into that. Now I fade that back off as it comes out towards the end. That adds really nice texture to that swirl there. We'll go to another detail tool. There's just a couple of these that we're going to use on this pattern, but this is a mule's foot. Looks like a little V type of a tool. And right down here at the bottom of this pattern, kind of these two stumps, they have that sticker that comes out at the bottom and stops. So I'm going to put that V right at the bottom point of that. And following the curve, just stack 3 or 4 of those in behind there. Same thing here. We're going to put that V right there. Put a couple more of those faded off in there. Just adds that little wrinkle, kind of brings a little bit of life to that. All right, down to the last 2 steps of our tooling here. We're going to be doing our backgrounds and our decorative cuts. So for our backgrounding, I'm going to just grab a matte backgrounder. This little guy here works super good. We're literally going to be matting the backgrounds down with it. Just meaning mashing down those backgrounds so they're all going to be texturized with the texture on that tool and pushed down. which is gonna, by pushing those down, it kind of brings everything else up and highlights it. These last two steps I love because you can just watch your pattern come to life as you're doing it. One of the big tricks to those backgrounds, not really a trick, but it's something that you want to make sure you're doing, is get all the way next to those bevel lines. We don't want to hold off of those lines at all. We want to make sure it's all the way down in that bevel line. That's going to make things just look nice and crisp when you get finished there. Sometimes it takes just a little bit more care. May have to go back in a spot. Now here, this little background is really tiny, way too small for that tool, right? So now I'm gonna tip this tool so I can come around those corners, get in that background spot without putting the backgrounder tool on either the border or that swirl. So by tipping that, now we were able to background that little spot there as well. You notice the rest of these, I may tip that tool right in the corner here like this to get that nice and crisp, but then everywhere else we're keeping that really straight up and down. And what that does, by keeping your tool straight up and down, it keeps the bottom of that flat, so we're not getting gouges and ridges and discoloration in your background spot. You want that to look like a nice even matte, even texture back there. You don't want to see a bunch of tool marks in there because your tool is crooked. This is our last background spot here. I'm turning that as necessary so I can make sure and see that I'm not hitting my backgrounder up on a vine or anything. There we got all our background spots. Now to the final step here is going to be our decorative cuts. Now, if your leather's getting a little bit dry, mine's getting just a touch dry, I want to make sure that I get nice cuts in here. So I'm just going to real lightly put another coat of water on here. I'm going to do the whole thing so it don't get any water stains from that drying out. But it doesn't hurt anything to add a little moisture to that, but I'd rather do that than tool this too dry. You know, trying to be cutting that while it's too dry, I'm not going to get very nice cuts in there. But now that moisture looks good, we're going to start on these sticker vines. We talked about that short line, that short curved line where we put our shading, and then a long line down there. That's where I'm kind of pulling those decorative cuts. My shorter cut comes next to that shorter curve, and then a longer one that carries down there. This pod here's got a couple of those shorter curves, so I just pull cuts down on both sides of that. Now we want to make sure that our decorative cuts are pulling back down towards the center of those vines there, following the flow of that, so that way we're adding flow to our pattern, not taking it away from it. There's no one right way to do decorative cuts, but we just want them starting a little bit deeper, fading out light as we pull back, pulling back towards that skeleton, that main vine that we talked about there. Now here where this folded over, I'm gonna just come real light, put a little cross hatch in here. Just means pulling some cuts both ways, but those ones are really super light. It just adds a little bit of texture that'll pick up when we add our finish on here. Now coming around this swirl, I'm gonna stack a couple shorter cuts along that outside. And I'm gonna pull one long one around towards our inside here. There we go. It kind of tucks under that border and then picks up just a little bit there. That pattern there is tooled up, looking pretty sharp. I think it's looking sharp enough. We can even add a 23 plus over to this side. So I'm gonna put my maker's mark over here. There we go. Now we got that on the other end of it there. Okay, we're gonna let that dry up and then we can go to our next step. I wanna get our stitch grooves put in here before I put our finish on. So we can go get the stitch grooves on while this is getting dried out, but we've gotta look at where those center lines go and which grooves we wanna mark in there right now. So we wanna mark our stitches and remember this 1/2 inch sleeve that we need to have in the middle here. So that's what I'm gonna kinda hold up here and mark first. So I'm just using my pattern to lay this up in here. I'm gonna put a little mark on either of those. And then while I'm here, I already have these lines marked. I can put my mark on those as well. So now I should have 4 marks along here, just like we have on the pattern. Now I can use my straight edge here, and we're squared up on the edge of it. So using this edge and that edge kind of creates that square. I'm gonna shift just a little bit with my stitch groove here. Kind of check, make sure that's landing on my mark. Excellent. Kind of have to have that tipped so we can get that marked in there. Now I can move this down just a little bit. That one grooved out. Tip this around the other way. Do the same thing for these other two. These are the more challenging ones to mark. Again, I'm doing it with this groover just to kind of try to get a little bit of a groove for that stitch to lay down in. You don't have to do that. I could just have my scratch awl here and mark a line, but it's not getting much of a groove because I have it at a bagel angle, but it's going to help us a little bit. All right. Now what we've marked is our center stitch lines, and then these outside ones, they're 1/4 inch outside of the center ones there. Now I can come along the outside edge. But I'm stopping at that first stitch line, right? So our 2 center lines, aren't going to actually connect. And I want to make sure that I don't run a stitch line across that end, because that's going to make it where we can't get that spring clip in. Okay, stop that groove right there. Now we have our grooves all in the right spot. We're set to go to put our finish on here. Now, be careful when we're doing your finish that you don't get a bunch of stuff on the back side of this, right? This isn't like a pattern where you have the back of it taped. This is gonna, if you get the antique or dye or whatever finish you're doing, you're gonna get that on the back as well. So if you're not careful, you can take like a blue painter's tape, put that over there and protect that a little bit. My recommendation, just be neat and tidy about what you're doing and don't smear a bunch of stuff on your table and on that as well. But as this is getting just about back to color here, we're gonna keep a pretty natural finish on this. I have other videos showing different dye and finish processes you can check out and apply the same thing to this. But what we're gonna do here, we're gonna put a nice heavy oil on here, and then we'll put a clear finish on there, let that be, and this is gonna naturally patina, darken up over time. You can see there's one that gets carried. You get your hand oils, all that stuff. They darken and wear really, really cool. So I'm not worried about much of a finish on this. We are gonna oil this though, and then let that oil sit a little bit before we put our clear coat on there, and then we'll come back on the rest of the construction. So let's get some oil on here. We're gonna use the 100% pure neat's foot oil and scrap of sheepskin here to put that on with. Again, instead of going over to my finish station where we've got some stuff that's been on the paper, I'm just putting a paper towel under here, make sure we're guarding, protecting that back side of this. As we'll do all our finish right over here. But pretty decent coat of oil there, just nice and even. I am, because it's just an oil thing, I'm gonna go ahead and tip this over and we'll put an oil finish on the back here as well. This is just getting that moisture back in our leather, letting that recondition that. Now, oiling does change your colors slightly as well. They won't stay that dark. It'll lighten up as it soaks in. But I'm gonna grab my 2 pocket pieces and we're gonna oil those right now too. We got the oil out. Let's get those done so we keep everything nice and consistent with our finish. Sometimes if you're cutting this stuff out of scrap, you may be out of a little different hide or different area of the hide, and so your pockets might wind up a little different color from your liner or your outside. That's okay. It 2 tones and it all wears out in the same. I don't think there's a need to be too picky on when it comes to those interior pieces. But we're gonna let this sit, soak in for just a little bit, then we'll come back with our clear coat. The finish that we're gonna put on here is Resilane. I like this, just a nice, easy, clear coat finish to do. Always give that a good shake up as we do that. And then I put it on with a scrap of sheepskin. Just get some on that sheepskin there. And we'll come on here and use nice circles here. Make sure I got good even coverage. And then anywhere there's big buildup of bubbles, I just kind of knock those down a little bit with the edge of that sheepskin. Now we'll let that soak in, dry up really good, and then come back for the final kind of construction pieces of this, putting our pockets in here and the steps that we're gonna go in sewing those. Now that's dried, the first thing we're gonna do is come and stitch down these 2 inside lines. So we're gonna back stitch, stitch down, back stitch, come over this side, back stitch, stitch down, and back stitch. Once we have the 2 center stitches in place, now we can get our pockets placed in here because we're going to use those stitches as a guide. So I'm going to turn this over. Now this is where we do things a little bit different. Instead of this pocket just coming out to the end where it's easy just to stitch right around, it's easy to line up, we're going to be turning these around and coming in this direction. That way we can get to those cards from the outside edge. So we're going to line these pockets up using that bottom stitch line as our guide. So I'm going to put this up next to there where I can just see that stitch line that we just made. That's going to mark where the bottom of that goes. Now up here at the end, I'm just going to use my awl and put a little mark on either side right there. Now that just shows me how far up that pocket comes so I know where to glue at. Same thing on this side. I'm going to put the bottom of that pocket down in here where I can just see that stitch line, so it's right up next to that. And then we'll come in, make my little mark on each side so I know where to put that glue at. Again, what we're wanting to make sure is that pocket's down close enough to that stitch line that when we come in and stitch here, we don't miss this pocket on the back side. That's why it's crucial that it comes down to that stitch line down at the bottom there. So I got my glue here. I'm going to glue the inside of the pocket. Obviously not the whole pocket, just on the edges, right? Get just a little bit on this edge. And get all the way around our edge. Now, you can also use like double-sided sticky tape, just a little 1/4 inch double-sided tape would work as well. I just like the way this glue holds down for finishing edges. It makes it really nice there as well. But now on my edge here, stopping that glue by that little mark that we made. Same thing here by that little mark. I'm going to put just a little bit down here, making sure I don't go right up to that stitch line, right? But we're in there close. Now we're going to bring that pocket, put that in place again. Remember, get that down just inside that stitch line. Line up our outside edges. So we're going to do the same thing with this other pocket, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to actually set these corners down in here a little bit before we stitch that. So now before we stitch, if you look in here, you see that by layering that pocket, we get that little bit of a lip there. If you're sewing on a machine, that little edge can want to catch sometimes and just not feed as well through that machine. So we're going to grab a chunk of marble over here, just a nice smooth surface, and then flat face hammer. We're going to come down right in those points. Kind of mash that down a little bit. Now we've created a nice little ramp up there, so we're not going to catch that on our machine. Sewing by hand, that's not as big of an issue, but still nice to have that ramp up nice and smooth and even off of there. So we're going to take this over to the machine, and now we can stitch around those corners all the way around the ends on both sides. I'm going to sew from the top side, and that way our bottom stitch is going to be catching that pocket down there. Now with it all stitched up, pockets are secured, I want to finish this edge off before we insert the spring clip. So I'm going to start by sanding these edges flat there. Should be pretty darn close if you put them in right, but any variations, I want to take those out. So we're just going to sand that flat real quick. Then we'll come back with our edger and start putting the finish on those edges. But you can either use sandpaper, or I'm going to cheat a little bit and use my Cobra burnisher here. I got that nice and squared off. I can use my edgers, just a small edger. Take that little squared edge off of there, just starts rounding that up nice for us. Sometimes when I come around those corners, it's almost easier to turn the leather with the edger, help get around that nice and smooth. You gotta be careful when you come into that thinner spot where you're off your pockets, it doesn't gouge down real deep there too. Just something to watch for. Now we're going to flip that over. I'm going to catch around the outside edge of this, and then also around the inside of the bottom of those pockets. I can take a little edge off of that too. Just cleans that up. I don't know. You don't have to, but it just seems like a nice thing to do, so I like doing that. The insides down there at the centers, and catch a little bit of that edge. Again, making sure it don't gouge down in there too deep. But now those are rounded up there. I'm going to come back and dye the edges, which I have Phoebe's leather dye, the Cordovan is the color I like here on these edges. And I just put it in one of these dye markers. They're refillable, so it makes it nice. But I can watch this and get a nice, clean line all the way down there. I like these, gives you a ton of control there. Turn that over, just make sure I get good clean line down the inside here as well. And then I'm going to show you something a little bit different, new, I don't know, just a different product on edges that I tell you what, it works good, and the convenience is really big, and I'll show you what I mean here in just a second, because we're almost done getting this dye around here. Okay, got the dye on there. Now, whatever slicking compound you want to use, whether it's water and glycerin, old school type of stuff, or you're going to go with gum trag, which you've seen me use a lot. I really like that as well. But this right here, I have Martin's Mix put into this thing. I like it because it really stays so much of a liquid that it works well in these dye markers. These are just the refillable dye markers, but it goes on really easy because of that. So it saves having to kind of back and forth with an applicator, and that alone has caused me to start using this stuff quite a bit, and then the results I get with it have been great as well. So it actually Slicks up really nice. It doesn't take a ton of effort, but just like with any of the compounds you use, it's gonna get you a little bit of elbow grease in here. And this is just a scrap of canvas that I used to slick that. Right, what we're after is getting that nice slick feel to that edge, and then just a glass look to it as well. So I'll even turn that on edge. And where we've hammered those pockets down, where those slick together really nice there as well. Corners probably seem to be the hardest thing to get all the time, but okay. Now, boy, that is a nice glass finish. There we go. Kind of get some of that shine in there where you can see that. But feels really good for pretty minimal effort on that. Now we're going to be time to open up and start looking at getting this spring clip in here. So I am going to grab a little dish of water real quick. Okay, now to get this spring clip in and start forming this around here. First thing I'm going to do is just to start getting a little bend in that. I want to be careful. We don't want to crank this over hard. So just using this water here, as I start to bend that, you can see it'll kind of start getting through that finish a little bit. Remember, we have that Resilane finish, but as I bend that, it kind of starts opening that finish up just a little bit. Allows that water in there. And that just is going to help avoid damage to that leather as I bend and crease that over there. Now, I'm also going to come on the inside and put a little bit of water right in on that fold on the inside as well. So it doesn't take much, but now I brought this screwdriver over here too because it's kind of handy. It's about the same size as that spring clip. But it has a handle on it, so I'm not just doing it with my fingers. I can kind of work that in that open spot. Remember, that was that 1/2 inch that we didn't glue to start with. Now I can start putting a little bit of crease in that and bending that around while I have that screwdriver in there. And you can do it with just the straight clip itself too, but that's just handy to get in there with the handle. So now we'll take that spring clip, you can see it just snaps open, snaps shut. Put one end in there, snap it shut. Now you can grab this and kind of work and crease and get that worked in there. Now right at first they want to kind of open back up and sit like that. That's going to be like that really until you wear it in your pocket quite a bit. Or not quite a bit, really. It doesn't take long in your pocket because it heats up and molds, but you can add just a touch more water to that, and then also you can set something heavy on there, put a little tie around it if you're just really wanting it to take that shape for, you know, a storefront purpose or a booth purpose or anything like that. Put a little tie on it for a gift before you wrap it up, put it in a box. Anything like that will work, but this is ready to use. Throw cash, throw cards in there, and stick that in your pocket. Sometimes, depending on how aggressive you were with your glue, you may need to stick something in, pop any loose glue on the inside there. That just makes sure that opens up and your cards slide down in there nice and easy. Don't forget, the material pack is available at the link below if you want to get that, or if you just want the single tooling pattern that we did, You can get that over in the Leather Life community as well. Link to that down below too. But appreciate you hanging out with me and allowing me to be a part of your Leathercraft journey. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out as we do new projects every month.